The sun is about to ruin my shade, so we gotta be quick. I wanted to talk about one of the questions that I got a lot when I did my sort of Q&A on Instagram the other day, and it was all about whether or not you need Spanish to live in Mexico. It's a difficult question to answer, so I'm gonna start by telling you about my story a little bit. When I moved to Mexico in 2016, it was pretty much only supposed to be for a year. Like, I didn't have any real plans to be here long term. I came with my high school Spanish and not much else. I could get by in restaurants and bars just about, kind of saying sí and no. Oh no. He doesn't agree. Yeah, getting by, sort of like guessing what people were saying in restaurants, and knowing what the food was called that I liked. So that's how the first year of my life in Mexico went. I hung out with people who spoke English. Obviously I work from home, so I was working in English at home. And yeah, it was quite an isolated environment. And I lived quite easily, really, for almost 2 years in Mexico without spending a ton of time speaking Spanish. It was after that I realized that I wanted to stay longer in Mexico and that I was missing out on an incredible opportunity to be able to be immersed in the language and to speak the language and to learn and better understand the culture here. I read a quote the other day in a book. It's kind of cheesy, but it made me smile. And it was, if culture is a house, then the language is the key to the front door. And I just thought that was really poetic and true. I think it's really difficult to get to know a place, to really understand a country and culture that you want to live in and call home if you don't know the language, if you can't communicate with the people who live here who don't speak English. But I do want to address some of the questions that people dealt with specifically, that people had specifically on Instagram about when you first arrive here and how difficult it is. I also want to preface that it depends hugely on where you live, where you decide to move here in Mexico. There are pockets of expat communities all over this country where you could quite easily live and do everything, rent a house, do all your grocery shopping, set up your internet, do all of these things in English. I know people who have done it, and I know it's being done in continuously in other parts of the country. Places like Puerto Vallarta, Cancun, some parts of Baja California, Mexico City even, it's not impossible to rent and sort of get by without knowing very much Spanish. But yeah, if you move to more rural places or places where there aren't as many foreign tourists, Spanish will be much more necessary in those places like Chiapas or parts of Oaxaca, other parts of San Luis Potosí or Querétaro. Like, you definitely want to be able to speak Spanish in those places, or at least have a friend who can help you who speaks Spanish. So one of the biggest questions I got from those of you on Instagram was whether or not it was possible to rent and sort of find a place to live if you didn't speak very much Spanish. I mentioned in my last video in more detail all the different ways there are to find a place to live, find an apartment or a house to rent. But most specifically, if you don't speak Spanish, your best bet for finding a really good deal is to have a friend or someone who does speak Spanish who can help you. Bar that, if you're arriving and you don't know anyone, I really recommend probably getting a realtor. There are realtors all over the country who speak English, many of them from the US, from Canada. And they can help organize rentals and rental agreements, finding a place that is furnished or unfurnished depending on what you want. And as I mentioned in the last video, one of the best ways to find realtors is to get recommendations from people who already live in the location in which you're trying to move to. So again, I'll link below to a bunch of the Facebook groups of expats in different parts of the country so that you can get involved. But really, like, if you go onto Facebook and you go into the search bar, you type in Ensenada expats or Puerto Vallarta expats or insert name of town here, the groups will come up. Sometimes they have different names, friends of X or that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's relatively easy. Ask for recommendation on those groups. People are so helpful, and that's a really easy way to be able to find a place to rent. Alternatively, you can use Airbnb. It's not the most cost-effective way, but it does allow you to get to where you want to be. You can negotiate sort of long-term, month-by-month rates rather than night rates, and that allows you to get to know the place and see if it's where you want to be, and maybe even negotiate longer term leases with the people who run these Airbnbs. I know people who have done that too. Another question that I got was, how hard is it to find a job if you don't speak Spanish? Again, I addressed this in the previous video a little bit, but it definitely limits your chances of finding a job. I mean, it means you're working in a foreign environment, really. You're working in an environment where you're dealing with people from your country or people from other countries where they want to speak English, or if they want to speak the language that you know. So international schools where they speak English, other sorts of jobs that might be in English. It's difficult. If you're trying to find a job in Mexico that's going to sponsor you, and you're not a teacher or a coach or like a counselor, something that you can work around kids, or international kids especially, then it's going to be difficult, but not impossible. Maybe start with things online, work online, and you can live here in Mexico, and that may be a better option. The third question that came up a lot was how easy or hard it is to make friends if you don't speak Spanish. It's as easy or hard to make friends anywhere in the world, whether you speak their language or not. Finding friends as adults is, in my experience, quite difficult. There are lots of expats all over the country, and not just people from the US and the UK, and there's Canadians, and there's people from Europe, and people from India, and people from Australia, and people from Thailand. I've met so many different people in Mexico City, and there's tons of different groups. I've used websites like Meetup. That's a really good one if you want to like go hiking with a group, or find your sort of common interests and join those sort of groups. There's running groups, there's cycling groups, there's language groups. Is a really great place to start if you want to make friends who are also trying to maybe learn Spanish, or who want to practice their English. Yeah, it's just about putting yourself out there. There are so many opportunities to meet people. There's plenty of people who live here in Mexico who want to practice their English. Yeah, making friends is hard anywhere, but I don't think it's any harder here if you don't speak English. I think it's still, all about putting yourself out there and trying to find the groups that fit your hobbies and fit your personality. I obviously can't finish this video by not urging you, if you are thinking about moving to Mexico, that learning at least basic Spanish is where you should start. I feel so much more comfortable here now that I can speak conversationally, and I can get the things that I want when I'm setting up a house, or trying to meet new people, or going to a restaurant, or getting lost and looking for directions when I'm traveling around Mexico, and I can communicate with people in the street when I'm lost, or tour guides. We can go on tours in Spanish, which are much cheaper than going on tours in English with tourists. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons to learn the language, but most of all, you want to call it home and you want to live in a country, I think it's really important to respect the culture of that country and be able to communicate with its people in their language. I've done tons of videos about my Spanish language journey. The best thing that I've used so far is Baselang. That's really like a great place to start. That's how I got started last year. I did their Grammarless program, which was like a 2-month intensive, 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, immersive conversation style learning process, and it helped me so much. I still continue to do their sort of real world program, which is $150 a month for unlimited lessons. I take an hour a day, every day, 5 days a week, and I really feel so much more confident. So yeah, I'll link below to Baselang. It's a really great program, but alternatively, there are so many free resources on the internet, so many places to start. You just have to speak Spanish. Like, get out there. I hate when people say that, but it is true. Like, the best way to get a better grasp of the language is to start speaking it. You're gonna mess up. I mess up still all the time, but it's a process, and people are so appreciative here when you communicate with them, even if it's broken. Mexicans are so helpful. They like correct you in a way that doesn't feel like they're criticizing. They're just repeating what you're saying, and super helpful, so nice. And yeah, definitely get started with your language learning journey. If you have any questions about Spanish in Mexico, any other recommendations, I'd be happy to make another video. Just let me know in the comments if you want like a sort of recommendations for getting started with learning Spanish. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and I will see you next time. Bye!